A millionaire spots two homeless twins standing in the pouring rain. He's about to drive away when their faces stop him. They look just like him. Confused but intrigued, he approaches them. That's when the unthinkable happens. The twins whisper, "Daddy?" What follows is a shocking revelation that shakes his entire world. These twins claim he abandoned them, but the truth is even darker. A hidden betrayal from his past resurfaces, threatening to unravel his perfect life. Could these girls really be his? Or is this all part of a dangerous lie? What will he risk to uncover the truth? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across Chase Carter's pristine penthouse. He stood before his full-length mirror, adjusting his silk tie with practiced precision. Everything in his life was measured, controlled, perfect, from the carefully arranged furniture to his meticulously scheduled day. "Your coffee, sir?" his housekeeper called from the doorway, her voice barely a whisper. "Leave it on the counter," Chase replied without turning around. His voice was as crisp as his tailored suit, devoid of warmth. The drive to Carter Industries headquarters was silent. Chase's chauffeur, Marcus, had learned years ago that his employer preferred to spend the morning commute reviewing documents rather than engaging in small talk. The sleek black car glided through city traffic, a bubble of isolation in the bustling morning rush. At the office, Chase moved through the corridors like a shark through water, purposeful, commanding, feared. Employees scattered in his wake, their good mornings falling on deaf ears. In the boardroom, he transformed into something else entirely, a master performer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chase began, his voice smooth as honey as he addressed the investors, "Carter Industries isn't just about profit margins. It's about vision." The words felt hollow in his mouth, but his audience was captivated. They always were. Emily Thompson, his assistant of 5 years, watched from the corner. She saw what others missed, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. In quiet moments between meetings, she caught glimpses of something else. A man who stood at his window, staring at nothing, completely alone. The storm broke just as Chase was leaving the office. Rain lashed against the windows of his car as Marcus navigated the slick streets. Chase's mind wandered to the next day's meetings until a flash of movement caught his eye. Two girls huddled under a shop awning, their thin jackets offering little protection from the downpour. They looked about 12, with identical faces and dark hair plastered to their foreheads. Something about them made Chase's chest tighten uncomfortably. The way they stood, shoulders squared against the world, reminded him of himself at that age. But there were two of them, and their features. "Sir?" Marcus's voice broke through his thoughts. "Should we stop?" "No," Chase said sharply, turning away from the window. "Keep driving." But that night, sleep eluded him. Chase paced his penthouse, the girls' faces haunting him. There was something familiar in their eyes, something that tugged at memories he'd rather forget. He found himself at his desk, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but still began typing. Security camera footage from the street corner appeared on his screen, a perk of owning half the buildings in the business district. He watched the twins move through the frame, their movements synchronized, protective of each other. The resemblance was uncanny. It was like looking at old photographs of himself, split into two. But that was impossible. He had no family besides his father, and that relationship was cold and distant at best. Yet something compelled him to dig deeper. He opened another window, began searching police reports of homeless youth in the area. His heart raced as he typed, though he told himself it was merely curiosity, nothing more. "Marcus," he spoke into his phone, his voice tight with tension. "I need you to do something for me first thing tomorrow morning. Those girls we saw, I want to know everything about them. Where they go, what they do. Everything." He hung up before Marcus could reply, his hands shaking slightly as he set down the phone. The rain continued to fall outside his window, and somewhere in the city, two girls who wore his face huddled together for warmth. The next morning, Chase directed Marcus to drive through the neighborhood where they'd spotted the twins. His heart pounded against his expensive silk shirt as they crawled past shuttered storefronts and graffiti-covered walls. The area was a far cry from his usual pristine business district. "Stop here," Chase commanded, his eyes fixed on movement in an alley between two abandoned buildings. Through the tinted windows, he watched the two girls, the same ones from yesterday, digging through a rusty dumpster. Their clothes were even more ragged in the harsh daylight. One girl's reached deep into the container while the other kept watch, their teamwork speaking of long practice. Chase's throat tightened. He'd seen desperate people before, but something about these girls made his chest ache. "Wait here," he told Marcus, stepping out of the car before he could talk himself out of it. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the cracked pavement as he approached. The lookout girls spotted him first, his eyes widening in alarm. "Rose, someone's coming," the girl hissed to her sister. The other twin, Rose, yanked her head out of the dumpster, a half-eaten sandwich clutched in his dirty hand. Both girls backed away as Chase drew closer, their movements mirror images of each other. "It's all right," Chase said, trying to soften his usually commanding voice. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girls exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. The one called Rose stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between Chase and her sister. "What do you want?" Rose demanded, her young voice carrying a strength that impressed Chase. Chase studied their faces, really looked at them for the first time. The same sharp jawline he saw in the mirror every morning, the same determined set to their eyes. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his mouth suddenly dry. The quieter twin, who must be Lisa, spoke up. "Our mom's gone, but our daddy?" She glanced at Rose, who gave a slight nod. "You're our daddy." Chase barked out a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "That's impossible, I don't have any children." "Yes, you do," Rose insisted. Her hand went to his neck, pulling out a tarnished silver locket. "Look." Chase stepped closer, his legs feeling unsteady. Rose's fingers trembled as she opened the locket, revealing a small photograph inside. Chase's breath caught in her throat. Sarah Mitchell. Her smile beamed up at him from the tiny picture, exactly as he remembered her from 12 years ago. Before his father had sent him abroad for emergency business. Before all his letters had gone unanswered. Before she'd vanished without a trace. "We've been on our own since Mom got sick," Lisa said quietly. "She always told us about you. Said you'd want us if you knew." Chase staggered backward, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. The girls, his girls, watched him with those familiar eyes, hope and fear warring on their dirty faces. I have to go," Chase stammered, turning abruptly and nearly running back to his car. "Marcus, drive!" As they pulled away, Chase caught a glimpse of the twins in the rearview mirror. They stood close together, shoulders slumped, watching his retreat. But it was the locket that burned in his mind, that small silver pendant containing a ghost from his past and a truth he wasn't ready to face. Back in his office, Chase couldn't focus. Sarah's face floated before him, along with the unmistakable features he shared with those girls. Could it be true? Had his father's manipulation cost him not just the woman he'd loved, but his own children as well? Chase sat at his desk, unable to concentrate on the quarterly report spread before him. His phone lay on the polished mahogany surface, displaying the hastily snapped photo of Sarah's picture from the locket. Her smile haunted him, stirring memories he'd buried years ago. "Mr. Carter?" Emily Thompson's voice startled him. "The Tokyo investors are online too." Chase quickly locked his phone screen. "Cancel it, all of it. Clear my schedule for the rest of the day." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up without caring. "And Emily, I need your discretion on something important." Emily stepped into his office, closing the door behind her. In 15 years as his assistant, she'd never seen him so rattled. "Of course, sir. I need you to find me the best private investigator in the city. Someone who can work quickly and keep their mouth shut." Chase's fingers drummed against his desk. "It's a personal matter." Emily nodded, already pulling out her tablet. "I'll have 3 recommendations on your desk within the hour. After she left, Chase found himself staring at Sarah's photo again. The twins' faces merged with hers in his mind, and the resemblance was undeniable. With trembling fingers, he grabbed his car keys. Marcus raised an eyebrow when Chase directed him back to the alley but said nothing. The twins were still there, huddled in a doorway. They looked up warily as Chase approached. "Come with me," he said, his voice gentler than before. "Just for tonight. We'll get some food and you can clean up." Rose and Lisa exchanged glances. "How do we know we can trust you?" Rose asked. Chase's chest tightened. "Because I'm trying to trust you too." The ride to his penthouse was silent. In the elevator, Chase noticed how the girls pressed together, their shoulders touching as they stared wide-eyed at their reflection in the mirrored walls. They looked so small, so vulnerable. "The bathroom's through there," Chase said when they entered his home. "There are clean towels, and I'll find you some clothes." While the girls showered, Chase ordered dinner and searched through his closet for anything that might fit them. His mind wandered back to Sarah, to their whirlwind romance 12 years ago. He remembered her sudden silence, how his father had insisted the emergency business trip couldn't wait, how all his letters had gone unanswered. The twins emerged looking younger with their faces clean, swimming in Chase's smallest t-shirts. They ate pizza carefully, using napkins, stealing glances at Chase between bites. "Your mother," Chase said finally. "What happened to her?" Lisa's lower lip trembled. "She got sick last year, really sick. The doctors said it was cancer." "She tried to find you," Rose added, her voice hard. "But she said someone always stopped her letters from reaching you." Chase's stomach lurched. His father had always insisted on handling his personal correspondence while he was abroad. "My father," he whispered, pieces clicking into place. He must have intercepted everything. The girls finished eating in silence while Chase's mind raced. How many other lies had his father told? How many lives had he destroyed in the name of protecting the family empire? His phone buzzed. A message from Emily with the investigators' information. Chase glanced at the twins, now yawning despite their obvious efforts to stay alert. He'd have answers soon, but looking at them now, he already knew in his heart what those answers would be. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows as Rose and Lisa explored their temporary sanctuary. Their bare feet padded across the marble floors while Chase watched from his home office, pretending to work on his laptop. "Look at this TV," Rose exclaimed, pressing her nose against the massive screen. "It's bigger than our old apartment's wall." Lisa discovered the kitchen's automated coffee maker, pressing buttons randomly until it whirred to life. "Cool! It's like a robot!" Mrs. Martinez, Chase's housekeeper of 10 years, entered through the service entrance and froze at the sight of the two girls. Her eyes widened as Rose accidentally knocked over a crystal vase while reaching for the remote control. "I'm sorry!" Rose scrambled to pick up the pieces, but Mrs. Martinez rushed forward. No, Nino, you'll cut yourself." She shot Chase a bewildered look as she carefully swept up the broken crystal. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know you had visitors." Before Chase could respond, Lisa's experiment with the coffee maker resulted in hot liquid overflowing onto the pristine countertop. Mrs. Martinez muttered something in Spanish, hurrying to contain the mess. I was just trying to make you breakfast," Lisa said softly to Chase, her eyes filling with tears. Chase felt something crack inside his carefully constructed wall of indifference. "It's okay," she found himself saying. "It's just stuff." The elevator chimed and Emily Thompson stepped out carrying a thick manila envelope. She paused, taking in the scene. Two girls in oversized borrowed clothes, Mrs. Martinez mopping up coffee, and Chase looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "And who might these young gentlemen be?" "I'm Rose, and that's Lisa," Rose answered, straightening up like she was trying to appear more grown up. "Are you Mr. Carter's girlfriend?" Emily laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made both girls smile. "No, I'm his assistant, and much too smart to date my boss." Chase gestured Emily into his office while Mrs. Martinez supervised the twins' attempt to help clean up. Through the glass walls, He could see them carefully following her instructions, their faces serious with concentration. "They're wonderful girls," Emily said softly, placing the envelope on his desk. "Rough around the edges, maybe, but there's something special there." "They say they're mine," Chase replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you believe them?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." As Emily briefed him on the investigator's preliminary findings, Chase absently opened his desk drawer, searching for a pen. His hand brushed against something in the back, an envelope he'd never noticed before, yellowed with age. His heart stopped when he recognized Sarah's handwriting. With trembling fingers, he opened it. The letter was dated 12 years ago, just after she'd stopped responding to his messages. "Dear Chase," he read silently, "I've tried reaching you so many times. Your father says you're too busy building your future to be bothered with my news. But I have to try one last time. I'm pregnant, with twins. I know your father thinks I'm just after your money, but all I want is for our children to know their father." The letter slipped from Chase's numb fingers. Through the glass, he watched Rose help Mrs. Martinez load the dishwasher, while Lisa carefully wiped down the counter. Their movements, their expressions. He saw Sarah in every gesture. And now he saw himself too. "Oh God," he whispered, the weight of 12 years of absence crushing down on him. "What have I done?" Emily picked up the letter, reading it quickly. "Chase," she said gently, "you didn't know. You couldn't have known." But the guilt was already taking root, spreading through his chest like poison. 12 years of birthdays missed. 12 years of empty Christmas mornings. 12 years of his daughters living on the streets while he lived in luxury. The private investigator, Mr. Rodriguez, sat across from Chase in his office, spreading photos and documents across the mahogany desk. Emily stood nearby, taking notes, while Rose and Lisa played video games in the adjacent room. "I've confirmed their story, Mr. Carter," Rodriguez said, his voice grave. "Sarah Mitchell disappeared shortly after sending that letter to you. Her last known address was a small apartment in the Bronx, but the trail goes cold after that." Chase's hands clenched into fists. "How is that possible? People don't just vanish." "Sometimes they do when they're scared enough." Rodriguez pulled out another document. "I found something interesting. The week before she disappeared, she'd started asking questions about Carter Industries' overseas operations." Chase felt his stomach twist. He remembered his father's cryptic warnings about protecting the family legacy and how certain matters were better left undiscussed. That afternoon, Chase visited Gerald Winston, his father's former lawyer, in his downtown office. The elderly attorney's hands shook as he poured himself a drink. "Those girls," Winston said, not meeting Chase's eyes. "They look just like you did at that age." "What happened to their mother?" Chase demanded. "What did my father do?" Winston took a long sip. "Your father built an empire, Chase. But empires aren't built on good intentions alone. There were arrangements, deals that needed to stay hidden." "And Sarah discovered something?" "All I'll say is this. Your father would do anything to protect the family's reputation. Anything." Winston's voice dropped to a whisper. "If that young woman knew what was good for her, she would have run far and fast." Back at the penthouse, Chase found the twins helping Mrs. Martinez fold laundry. The simple domesticity of the scene made his heart ache. "Did you ever have enough to eat?" he asked suddenly. "When you were before?" Rose's hand stilled on the towel he was folding. "Sometimes. The shelter on 42nd Street gave out good sandwiches on Thursdays." "But winter was hard," Lisa added quietly. "Mom tried her best, but after she went away, it got harder." Chase noticed the scars then, not just the physical ones, like the badly healed break in Rose's left arm that made it sit slightly wrong, or the burn mark on Lisa's hand. He saw the deeper wounds, the way they hoarded food in their pockets when they thought no one was looking, how they flinched at sudden movements, their reluctance to sleep in separate rooms. He called Rodriguez that evening after the girls had finally fallen asleep. "Whatever it costs," Chase said, his voice firm. "I want every stone turned, every lead followed. Someone knows what happened to Sarah Mitchell. and I'm going to find out who. Sir, Rodriguez hesitated. Some secrets are dangerous to uncover. Chase looked at the photo on his desk. Rose and Lisa at lunch earlier that day, their first genuine smiles since arriving. These girls have suffered enough. They deserve to know what happened to their mother, and I deserve to know what my father did. Find her, Rodriguez. Find her at any cost. Rodriguez arrived at Chase's penthouse late one evening, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with discovery. Chase ushered him into his home office while Emily brought them coffee. "We found her, Mr. Carter," Rodriguez said, pulling out a manila envelope. "Sarah Mitchell is alive." Chase's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a recent photograph of a woman with graying brown hair, taken from a distance. Despite the years that had carved new lines in her face, he recognized her immediately. "Where is she?" Chase asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Small town in Oregon. She's living under an assumed name, Catherine Walsh. Works as a librarian." Rodriguez leaned forward. "But here's the thing. She's scared. Really scared. My contact tried to approach her and she practically ran." Emily, who had been taking notes, looked up. "Did you find out why?" Rodriguez nodded grimly. "It traces back to Carter Industries' operations in Southeast Asia circa 2005. Your father was involved in some questionable labor practices, Mr. Carter. Sarah stumbled onto documentation. Contracts, photos, evidence of what was happening in those factories." "And my father threatened her?" Chase's jaw clenched. "Worse, he made her disappear. Arranged it so she'd either have to leave the girls or risk everything coming to light. She chose to protect them by running." None of them had noticed the door cracking open slightly, or the twin shadows listening intently from the hallway. "She didn't abandon us?" Rose's voice cracked as he pushed the door open fully. Both girls stood there, tears streaming down their faces. Chase's heart nearly stopped. "Rose, Lisa, you shouldn't—" "She was protecting us?" Lisa interrupted, her usually quiet voice rising with emotion. "All this time we thought she didn't want us anymore." Emily moved quickly to the girls' side, pulling them into a gentle embrace as they broke down sobbing. Chase watched, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. "She loved us," Rose choked out between sobs. "She really loved us." Chase knelt before his daughters, taking their small hands in his. "Listen to me, both of you. I promise you, I swear on everything I have, that I will make this right. We're going to find your mother and bring her home." "But what about your father's threats?" Emily asked softly. Chase stood, his expression hardening with determination. "My father's gone now, and his empire stops here. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to tear it all down. Every corrupt deal, every dirty secret. I'll expose it all myself if that's what it takes to make it safe for Sarah to come home." "Sir," Rodriguez warned, "that could cost you everything. The board won't stand for it, the shareholders—" "I don't care," Chase cut him off. "Look at them, Rodriguez." He gestured to the twins who were still clinging to Emily. "These girls lost their childhood because of my father's crimes. Their mother lost everything. I've spent my whole life building walls around myself, protecting an empire built on other people's pain. No more." Rose and Lisa looked up at their father with newfound hope in their tear-stained faces. For the first time, they saw not the cold businessman who had found them in that alley, but a father willing to risk everything to heal their broken family. Chase pulled out his phone and dialed his lawyer's number. "Jack, I need you to start proceedings immediately. We're going to audit every Carter Industries subsidiary, starting with the Southeast Asian operations from 2005, and call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. It's time to clean house." The morning sun cast long shadows across Chase's desk as he pored over stacks of financial records. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he couldn't stop. Every document revealed another layer of his father's corruption. Emily entered his office carrying fresh coffee. "The board members are furious about the audit," she said, placing the cup beside him. 3 of them threatened to resign. "Let them," Chase muttered, not looking up from the papers. "Look at this. Dummy corporations set up in every major city. They were buying properties at rock-bottom prices. forcing families out of their homes. Emily leaned over his shoulder, scanning the document. These addresses, they're all in low-income neighborhoods. My father would create housing crises, then swoop in as the savior with affordable housing projects. Chase's voice cracked with disgust. The same pattern, city after city, including the neighborhood where I found the girls. Later that afternoon, Chase drove through one of these neighborhoods, the streets lined with dilapidated buildings bearing Carter Properties signs. He parked outside a rundown office building and found Marcus Wheeler, his father's former business partner, waiting inside. "You're making a mistake, Chase," Wheeler said, his expensive suit out of place in the shabby surroundings. "Your father built an empire. Are you really going to throw it all away for some woman and her brats?" Chase's hands clenched into fists. "Those brats are my daughters, and that woman lost everything because she tried to expose what you and my father were doing." Wheeler's face hardened. "Your father protected you from the ugly side of success. You really want to know what it takes to stay on top? Keep digging, and you might not like what you find." When Chase returned home, his world tilted on its axis. The twins were gone. Their beds were empty, their backpacks missing. "They left this," Emily said, handing him a crumpled note. Chase's hands shook as he read the childish scrawl. "Gone to find Mom. Don't worry." "Call Rodriguez," Chase ordered, already heading for the door. "Tell him to check the bus stations and train stations. They might be trying to get to Oregon." They found Rose and Lisa 3 blocks from the bus station, surrounded by a group of rough-looking men. The girls were backed against a wall, clutching their backpacks. "Hey!" Chase shouted, jumping out of his car before it fully stopped. Emily was right behind him, her phone ready to call the police. "These your kids?" one of the men sneered. "Better keep them on a tighter leash." Chase stepped between the men and his daughters, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Back off. Now." Something in his tone made the men retreat, muttering threats as they disappeared into the shadows. Chase turned to the twins, who looked both scared and defiant. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, pulling them into a tight hug. "We heard Wheeler threatening you," Rose said, his voice muffled against Chase's chest. "We thought if we found Mom ourselves, you wouldn't have to risk everything." "We don't want you to lose your company because of us," Lisa added softly. Chase knelt before them, his eyes fierce with emotion. "Listen to me, both of you. Nothing, no company, no money, nothing, is more important than keeping you safe and finding your mother. Do you understand?" The girls nodded, tears streaming down their faces. "Let's go home," Emily said gently, guiding them toward the car. "Your father has work to do." Chase watched his daughters climb into the back seat, his resolve strengthening. Wheeler's threat echoed in his mind, but he pushed it aside. He would tear down his father's corrupt empire brick by brick, if that's what it took to make things right. The private investigator's call came just after midnight. Chase fumbled for his phone, his heart racing as he listened to the news. "We found her, Mr. Carter," Rodriguez said. "Sarah Mitchell, that's her alias. She's been working minimum wage jobs, moving every few months. Currently, she's a waitress at a diner in Portland." Chase sat up in his bed, fully awake now. "Are you certain it's her?" "The facial recognition software confirms it. She's dyed her hair and lost weight, but it's her." After hanging up, Chase couldn't contain his excitement. He hurried to the twins' room, only to find them already awake, huddled together on Rose's bed. "Girls, I have wonderful news," he began. "Save it," Rose cut him off, her young face twisted with anger. "We heard you talking to Emily earlier about your company's stock dropping." Lisa nodded, his usual gentle expression hardened. "You care more about your precious business than finding our mom." Chase stepped back, stunned by the venom in their voices. "That's not true. You're just like all the other rich people," Rose spat. "Living in your fancy tower pretending to care about us poor folks, but all you really care about is looking good for the newspapers." "We thought you were different," Lisa added quietly, her soft voice carrying more hurt than Rose's anger. "But you're just another selfish billionaire." Chase stood frozen, their words cutting deeper than any business loss ever had. Emily, who had been passing by, stepped into the room. Why don't we all take a breath? She suggested, placing a gentle hand on Chase's shoulder. She led him out to the hallway, leaving the girls to cool down. They're scared, Chase, Emily said softly, and hurt. They've spent years wondering why their mother left, why their father never looked for them. You can't fix that with money or resources. But I am looking for her, Chase protested. I just got a lead. They don't need your efficiency right now, Emily interrupted. They need their father. When was the last time you told them how you feel? Really feel? Chase ran his hands through his hair, remembering his own childhood, the cold efficiency of his father, the emotional distance that had shaped him. Taking a deep breath, he returned to the twins' room. They were still on Rose's bed, their anger now mixed with tears. You're right, Chase said quietly, sitting on the floor near them. I haven't been the father you deserve. The girls looked up, surprised by his admission and his position below them, rather than towering over them as usual. I grew up learning to hide my feelings, to focus on success instead of connections. But when I saw you both that first day, something in my heart broke open. Chase's voice wavered. I'm terrified of failing you, of not finding your mother in time, of not being good enough to make up for all the years I wasn't there. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he continued. Your mother is my top priority. Not the company, not my reputation. You and your mother. I just got word that we found her. She's in Portland, working at a diner under a different name. Rose and Lisa slid off the bed, moving closer to their father. You really found her? Lisa whispered. Chase nodded, opening his arms. The girls hesitated for a moment before falling into his embrace. I promise you both, Chase said, holding them tight. We're going to bring her home. Nothing else matters. The morning news hit like a thunderbolt. Chase stared at his tablet, his coffee growing cold beside him as headlines screamed across the screen. Carter Empire built on corruption. Whistleblower reveals decades of fraud. Marcus Sterling, his father's former business rival, had released documents detailing years of illegal dealings. Chase recognized many of the transactions, projects he'd inherited without knowing their dark foundations. Emily burst into his study, her face flushed. Chase, the board is demanding an emergency meeting. The stock is in free fall. Before Chase could respond, he heard a small gasp from the doorway. Rose and Lisa stood there, still in their pajamas, their faces pale with worry. This is because of us, isn't it? Rose's voice trembled. Because you've been looking for Mom instead of running your company. Lisa clutched her sister's arm. We should go. We're just making everything worse. Chase's heart clenched at their words. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, kneeling before them. No, absolutely not. This has nothing to do with you. This is about my father's mistakes, not about our family. But your company? Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Is just a company, Chase finished firmly. You girls and your mother are what matter now. The twins exchanged uncertain glances. We heard the housekeeper saying you might lose everything, Rose whispered, because of what that man revealed about Grandpa's business. Emily stepped forward, her expression gentle. Girls, come sit with me for a minute. She led them to the plush sofa, while Chase took his urgent phone calls in the corner. You know what I see? Emily asked the twins. I see your father choosing love over money for the first time in his life. That's not something to feel guilty about. That's something to be proud of. Chase ended his call and joined them, his face tired but determined. Emily's right. For years, I ran this company exactly like my father taught me, caring only about profits and power. But meeting you two, he smiled softly. You showed me what really matters. But what if you lose everything? Rose asked. Then we'll start over, Chase said simply. Together. As a family. Emily pulled out her tablet, her organizational skills kicking in. We need to handle this strategically. Chase, you focus on the board meeting. I'll contact our PR team and legal department. She turned to the twins. And you two need to remember that none of this is your fault. Your father is finally becoming the man he was meant to be. Chase's phone buzzed again, another crisis demanding attention. but before answering, he hugged his daughters tightly. "I spent years building wealth but never had anyone to share it with. Now I have something worth so much more." The girls hugged him back, their earlier guilt giving way to determination. "We'll help," Lisa declared. "Whatever you need." "Just stay right here with me," Chase replied. "That's all I need." Emily watched the scene with a smile before returning to business mode. "All right, let's tackle this head on. The company may take some hits, but we'll protect what matters most, this family." Chase nodded, standing up straighter. Marcus Sterling might have exposed his father's corruption, but in doing so, he'd only strengthened Chase's resolve to build something better, something based on love rather than greed. The private investigator's call came late that evening. Chase paced in his study, listening intently as the truth he'd dreaded finally emerged. "Your father's associates, particularly James Morrison and Robert Blake, directly threatened Sarah Connor, the girl's mother," the investigator explained. "They told her if she ever contacted you about the pregnancy, they would ensure she'd never see her children again." Chase's hand tightened around the phone. "And my father?" "He orchestrated the whole thing. I found documentation, letters, recorded conversations. He wanted you focused solely on the company. A family would have been a distraction." The words hit Chase like physical blows. His father's manipulation had torn apart not just his life, but the lives of 3 innocent people. He thanked the investigator and hung up, his mind already planning his next move. The following morning, Chase stormed into James Morrison's private club, a place where his father's old guard still gathered. Morrison sat at his usual corner table, nursing a drink despite the early hour. "I know what you did to Sarah Connor," Chase said, his voice cold and controlled. "I know about the threats, the intimidation." Morrison's weathered face showed no surprise. "Your father gave the orders. We just carried them out." "Why?" Chase demanded. "Why would you help destroy an innocent woman's life?" "Because your father paid us well," Morrison replied with a shrug. "And because he was convinced you'd throw away the empire for some waitress and her babies." "Chase needs to focus," he kept saying. "The legacy is all that matters." Neither man had noticed the study door hadn't completely closed. In the hallway, Rose and Lisa stood frozen, having followed their father out of concern. They heard every word, their young faces growing paler with each revelation. "So you threatened her," Chase's voice shook with rage. "Forced her into hiding, left her children homeless." "Business is business," Morrison said dismissively. "Your father built an empire. Sometimes that requires sacrifices." A small sound from the hallway made Chase turn. His heart sank as he saw his daughters standing there, tears streaming down their faces. "You mean we were homeless because of your father?" Rose's voice cracked. "Mom was scared because of him?" Lisa stepped forward, her usual quiet demeanor replaced by anger. "We ate from dumpsters because of your family?" Chase moved toward them, but Rose backed away. "Don't, you're part of them. Part of the people who hurt Mom." "No," Chase said firmly, kneeling to their level. "I never knew. I would have stopped it if I'd known. But I promise you this, I'm going to make it right." He turned back to Morrison, who watched the scene with uncomfortable recognition. "You're going to tell me everything. Every threat, every scheme, every person involved. And then I'm going to tear down every corrupt piece of my father's empire until we find Sarah." Morrison shifted nervously. "You'd destroy everything your father built?" "No," Chase replied, drawing his daughters close as they finally let him comfort them. "I'm going to build something better. Something based on truth and justice, not threats and fear." Rose and Lisa looked up at their father, seeing the determination in his eyes. Despite their pain, they felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time, they saw Chase not as a wealthy businessman, or even just their father, but as someone who would fight to right the wrongs of the past. Chase sat in his office, methodically signing papers that would dissolve major portions of his father's business empire. Each signature felt like another step toward redemption. Emily Thompson stood nearby, watching as decades of corrupt business dealings began crumbling. The media would be powerful allies, Emily suggested gently. One press conference could expose everything. Chase paused, pen hovering over another document. And alert everyone who might want to keep Sarah hidden. We can't risk it, not when we're so close. Rose and Lisa sat quietly on the office couch, their homework forgotten as they watched their father work. The past few days had shown them a different side of Chase, determined, focused, and fiercely protective. "What about Marcus Webb?" Emily asked, referring to Chase's father's former lawyer. "He knows more than he's telling." Chase's jaw tightened. "You're right. It's time for another conversation with Marcus." Later that afternoon, Chase confronted Marcus Webb in the lawyer's expensive downtown office. The older man's carefully maintained composure cracked as Chase laid out the evidence they'd gathered. "You've known where Sarah was this whole time," Chase said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Every year she struggled. Every night the girls went hungry. You knew." Marcus loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your father paid me well to keep quiet." "I'm not my father," Chase replied, "and I'm prepared to bring down this entire corrupt system unless you tell me where she is." "You'd destroy everything?" Marcus asked, echoing Morrison's words from earlier. "For my family, without hesitation." Marcus stared at Chase for a long moment, then slowly opened his desk drawer. He withdrew a thin file and placed it on the desk. "She's working as a waitress in a small diner in Portland, living under the name Sarah Mitchell." Chase's hands trembled as he picked up the file. After all these years, after all the suffering, the answer had been sitting in a drawer. "She checks in every month," Marcus continued, his voice heavy with guilt, "making sure the threats are still being enforced. She's terrified, Chase. Has been since the day your father's men first approached her." Emily met Chase at his office afterward, immediately noticing his agitation. "You found her?" Chase nodded, spreading the file contents across his desk. "We need to move carefully. If anyone realizes we're going after her..." "We'll protect her," Emily assured him, already pulling up travel arrangements on her tablet. "We'll bring her home." Rose and Lisa burst into the office, their faces flushed with excitement. "Did you really find Mom?" Rose asked breathlessly. Chase gathered his daughters close. "Yes, but getting to her safely will be tricky. There are still people who might try to stop us." "We're not afraid," Lisa said firmly. "We want our mom back." Chase looked at Emily, who nodded in determination. Together, they began planning the delicate operation that would finally reunite this broken family. The small diner in Portland was quiet during the mid-afternoon lull. Chase's heart pounded as he spotted her through the window. Sarah, looking older but still beautiful, carrying plates to a corner booth. "Wait here," he told Emily, who stayed in the car with Rose and Lisa. The bell above the door chimed as Chase entered. Sarah glanced up, then froze, her face draining of color. The plates in her hands trembled. "Sarah," Chase said softly. She backed away, shaking her head. "You can't be here. Please, just go." "The girls are safe. They're right outside." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I can't. They'll hurt them if I..." "No one will hurt them anymore, I promise." Chase took a step closer. "They need their mother." Sarah clutched her order pad like a shield. "You don't understand. These people, they're powerful. They threatened to..." The bell chimed again. Rose and Lisa burst through the door, unable to wait any longer. "Mom!" they cried in unison. Sarah's order pad clattered to the floor. She pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she took in the sight of her daughters, older, taller, but unmistakably her babies. "My girls," she whispered, "my beautiful girls." Rose and Lisa ran to her. She dropped to her knees, wrapping them in her arms as sobs racked her body. The few customers in the diner watched the scene unfold, dabbing at their own eyes. "I'm so sorry," Sarah kept saying. "I never wanted to leave you. They said they would hurt you if I didn't disappear." "We know, Mom," Lisa said, her voice muffled against her shoulder. "Chase's Dad's people," Rose added. "But Dad's different. He's helping us." Sarah looked up at Chase, her eyes uncertain. "They threatened to destroy everything if I told you about the pregnancy." said they'd make sure the girls never had a chance at a normal life. Chase knelt beside them. My father's empire is crumbling. I'm dismantling it piece by piece. But his associates? We'll face them together, Chase promised. Come home with us. Sarah hugged her daughters tighter. It won't be easy. These people, they won't just let go. We don't care, Rose said fiercely. We want our family together, Lisa added. Sarah looked around the diner, at her simple life of hiding and survival, then back at her daughters' hopeful faces. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Emily helped Sarah gather her few belongings from her small apartment above a laundromat. Within hours, they were heading back to the city, the girls curled up against their mother in the back seat of Chase's car. They'll come after us, Sarah warned quietly, running her fingers through Rose's hair as she dozed. Your father's associates won't let this go easily. Chase met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Let them try. The first few days in Chase's penthouse were a whirlwind of emotions. Sophie spent hours just holding the twins, making up for lost time with tender hugs and whispered conversations. Her eyes would light up at their stories, then cloud with pain when they mentioned particularly difficult times on the streets. Mom, you have to see the view from the roof garden. Rose tugged at her sleeve one morning. Sophie tensed. I'd rather stay inside, sweetheart, it's safer. But no one can see us up there, Lisa insisted. Chase watched from the doorway as Sophie pulled the girls closer. Maybe another time, she said softly. At work, Chase faced his own battles. His business associates crowded his office, faces lined with concern and frustration. The Morrison development was worth millions, one board member argued. You can't just pull out because of some vague ethical concerns. Those vague concerns involved forcing families from their homes, Chase replied firmly. We're done with those kinds of deals. Emily knocked and entered with a stack of papers. The press is asking questions about the liquidation of the Riverside properties. Chase rubbed his temples. Tell them no comment for now. That evening, tension crackled through the penthouse as Chase and Sophie argued in his study. We need to expose everything, Chase insisted. My father's associates can't hide from the truth. You don't understand what they're capable of, Sophie's voice shook. I spent years running because of what they threatened to do to the girls. And now we have resources, protection. Money didn't stop them before, Sophie cut in. Your father had plenty of that. Emily, who had been quietly organizing files nearby, stepped forward. If I may. Both turned to look at her. There might be a middle ground here. What do you mean? Chase asked. We can work behind the scenes, gather evidence, build a solid case. Meanwhile, we keep the family safe and protected. Emily spread some documents on Chase's desk. I've been tracking paper trails. There's a lot we can do without drawing attention. Sophie wrapped her arms around herself. That could work. We'd need time, Emily continued, but we could build something they can't fight. Chase looked between Emily and Sophie, his expression softening. Would that help you feel safer? He asked Sophie. She nodded slowly. As long as the girls are protected. I'll hire additional security, Chase promised. Discreet, but thorough. From the hallway came the sound of running feet and laughter, Rose and Lisa chasing each other. Sophie's face softened at the sound, and some of the tension left her shoulders. Okay, she said quietly. We'll try it your way, Emily. But at the first sign of trouble. We'll have contingency plans, Emily assured her. Multiple ones. Chase reached out, hesitantly touching Sophie's arm. We're stronger together. All of us. The security team Chase hired was top-notch, but Sophie still jumped at every shadow. She kept the curtains drawn and checked the locks multiple times a day. Her nervous energy spread through the penthouse like a quiet storm. Did you see that car? She asked one afternoon, peering through a crack in the curtains. It's been parked there for hours. Chase moved to her side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's Officer Martinez. He's part of our security detail. But even Chase had to admit that Sophie's fear wasn't entirely unfounded. Emily had noticed unusual activity around their digital footprint, small intrusions that seemed too coordinated to be random. The twins, though, were harder to contain. After years on the streets, they were finally living a life worth sharing. "Look what I found." Rose burst into the living room waving his phone. "Our old friend Tommy from the shelter liked our family photo." Sophie's face went pale. "What photo?" "The one from dinner last night," Lisa explained proudly. "Rose posted it on social media. We wanted to show Tommy we're okay now." "Take it down," Sophie whispered, her hands shaking. "Take it down right now." But it was too late. Within hours, Emily rushed into Chase's office, her usually calm demeanor cracked with worry. "The photo's been shared hundreds of times. Someone's running facial recognition software against our networks." That evening, the security team reported movement in the shadows near the property's perimeter. A figure in dark clothing, too quick to catch on camera, but deliberate in their movements. "They found us," Sophie said, her voice breaking as she watched the security footage. "Just like before." Chase gathered his family in the penthouse's secure room, a space he'd never thought he'd need to use. Rose and Lisa huddled close to their mother, their earlier excitement replaced by quiet fear. "Emily," Chase spoke into his phone, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I need everything you've gathered on my father's associates, every document, every connection, every whispered rumor." "Chase," Emily's voice crackled through the speaker. "Are you sure? Once we start down this path—" "They're threatening my family," Chase cut in. "No more hiding. No more waiting." The mysterious figure appeared twice more that night, testing the property's defenses. Each time they vanished before security could respond, leaving behind only grainy footage and Sophie's escalating fear. "I should have known better," Sophie whispered as they watched another security alert flash on the monitors. "I should have kept running." Chase took her hand, surprising them both. "No more running," he said firmly. "This time, we fight back." The private investigator arrived at Chase's penthouse late that evening, carrying a thick manila envelope. His weathered face looked grimmer than usual as he spread dozens of documents across Chase's mahogany desk. "It's worse than we thought," the investigator said, pointing to financial records and surveillance photos. "Your father's empire wasn't just corrupt, it was a criminal enterprise. And Gregory Mills was the mastermind behind most of it." Chase's hands trembled as he examined a particularly damning photograph showing Mills with known criminals. "He was my father's right-hand man. I trusted him." "He's still running things," the investigator continued. "The threats against Sophie, the pressure on your business, it all leads back to him." In the living room, Sophie sat with the twins, trying to keep them occupied with a board game. Her forced smile couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. Emily arrived shortly after, her laptop filled with additional evidence she'd uncovered. "Chase, we have enough here to bring him down," she said, her voice urgent. "But we need to move fast. A direct confrontation might be our best chance to get him to slip up." "No," Sophie overheard and rushed into the study. "You don't know Mills like I do. He's ruthless. The things he threatened to do." Her voice cracked as she remembered those dark days. Rose and Lisa appeared in the doorway, their young faces etched with concern. "Mom?" Rose asked. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetie." Sophie tried to reassure them, but her voice wavered. "Mills needs to be stopped," Emily insisted. "He's already making moves against Chase's company. If we don't act now, he'll destroy everything." Chase stood by the window, staring at the city lights below. The weight of his father's legacy pressed down on him like a physical burden. How many families did he hurt? How many lives did he destroy? "Chase, please," Sophie pleaded. "There must be another way." But Chase had already made up his mind. He turned to face his family, his expression resolute. "I'm meeting with Mills. Tomorrow." "It's suicide," Sophie whispered. "No," Chase replied firmly. "It's the only way to end this, to protect our family." Emily nodded in agreement. "I'll set up the meeting. We'll have backup in place." The twins moved to stand beside their mother, sensing her distress. Lisa took her hand while Rose looked up at Chase with worried eyes. "You can't stop me," Chase said softly to Sophie. Not this time. Mills has to answer for what he's done. To you, to our girls, to everyone he's hurt. The meeting was set for midnight at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Chase arrived early, his footsteps echoing through the empty space. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Gregory Mills emerged from the darkness, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the rundown surroundings. His silver hair gleamed, and a practiced smile spread across his face. "Chase, my girls," Mills said warmly. "It's been too long. Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished." "Let's skip the small talk," Chase replied coldly. "I know what you did." Mills's smile didn't waver. "Oh? And what exactly do you think I did?" He walked slowly around Chase like a predator circling its prey. "You helped my father keep Sophie away from me. You threatened her, forced her into hiding with my children." "Your father made certain choices," Mills said carefully, "all to protect the empire he built for you. Sophie was a distraction, and those children, well, they would have complicated things." Chase's fists clenched. "You destroyed their lives." "We gave you everything." Mills's friendly facade cracked slightly. "Your father saw how that girl clouded your judgment. The night she came to tell you about the pregnancy, he made sure you were too busy with that merger in Tokyo to see her." The revelation hit Chase like a physical blow. The emergency board meeting? That was all planned? Of course. Mills's smile turned cruel. Just like the threatening phone calls that convinced her to run, the chance encounters with our associates that kept her moving from city to city, all carefully orchestrated. "You're a monster," Chase whispered. "Speaking of orchestration," Mills said smoothly, "how are the twins adjusting to their new home? And Sophie, is she sleeping well? It would be terrible if something happened to disrupt their peace." Chase stepped forward, but Mills raised a warning finger. "Careful now. You wouldn't want to do anything rash, not when your family's safety is at stake. If you go near them—" "You'll what?" Mills interrupted. "Expose me? Remember who else goes down if you start digging too deep? Your father's legacy, your legacy will crumble." Chase backed away, his heart pounding. Mills's threats weren't empty. He could see it in the man's cold eyes. "Think carefully about your next move, Chase," Mills called after him as he headed for the door. "Family is everything, isn't it?" Chase hurried to his car, his hands shaking as he started the engine. The meeting had confirmed his worst fears. Mills wouldn't stop until he had complete control, and his family would never be safe as long as Mills held power. As he drove home, Chase knew there was only one option left. He had to expose everything, no matter the cost to his reputation or his fortune. His family's safety was worth more than any empire. Sophie paced the living room of Chase's penthouse, her face flushed with anger. "How could you be so reckless?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Meeting Mills alone? He's dangerous, Chase." Chase ran his fingers through his hair, exhausted. "I had to face him. I needed answers." "Answers?" Sophie's laugh was bitter. "You already knew what he did to us. Now you've painted a target on all our backs, including the girls." "I was trying to protect you," Chase insisted. "Protect us? You've made everything worse." Sophie's voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what it was like running from city to city, watching over my shoulder, working 3 jobs just to feed our children?" Unknown to them, Rose and Lisa huddled in the hallway, listening. Rose gripped her sister's hand tightly. "This is our fault," Lisa whispered. "If we hadn't found him—" "Maybe we should leave," Rose suggested, his voice thick with emotion. "Look what we've done to his life." Emily Thompson, who had been quietly observing, finally stepped forward. "Stop," she said firmly, cutting through the tension. "All of you, just stop." She turned to Sophie and Chase. "You're both letting fear drive you apart when you need each other most." Then she called out, "Girls, I know you're listening. Come in here." Rose and Lisa shuffled into the room, heads down. "Nobody is leaving," Emily declared, "and nobody is to blame except Mills and his corrupt empire. But fighting each other? That's exactly what he wants. Sophie's anger deflated as she saw the pain in her daughter's faces. Chase moved toward the twins, kneeling before them. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I never meant to frighten you, and none of this is your fault." "But your company," Rose started, "is nothing compared to having my family," Chase finished. Sophie wiped away tears. "The girls are right about one thing. We need a better plan than confronting Mills alone." Emily nodded. "Then let's make one. Together. Mills might be powerful, but he's not invincible." The twins looked up hopefully. "You mean you're not sending us away?" Lisa asked. "Never," Sophie and Chase said simultaneously, then shared a surprised look. "See?" Emily smiled. "You're already working as a team." The next morning, Chase arrived at his office to find it in shambles. Papers were strewn across the floor, and his family photos lay shattered on the ground. Among the mess, a single note sat on his desk. "Back off or they'll pay the price." His hands trembled as he called Sophie. "Are you and the girls okay?" "We're fine," she answered, but her voice was tense. "Chase, there's a note here too. Someone slipped it under the door." Chase's heart pounded. "Don't touch it, I'm coming home." While their parents discussed the threats in Chase's study, Rose and Lisa huddled in their room, guilt weighing heavily on their hearts. "We have to do something," Rose whispered. "Mom and Chase are in danger because of us." Lisa nodded. "I overheard Emily saying Mills has an office downtown. Maybe if we talk to him." "Show him we're not afraid," Rose finished. The twins waited until Sophie went to take a shower and Chase stepped out to talk with security. They slipped out through the service entrance, their hearts racing as they caught a bus downtown. Meanwhile, Chase found the girls' room empty. Panic seized him when he discovered their note. "Gone to fix this. Don't worry." "They've gone after Mills," Sophie cried, her face pale. "Chase, we have to find them." They raced downtown in Chase's car, Sophie calling Emily for help while Chase pushed through traffic. They spotted the twins just as they were being approached by two menacing men in dark suits outside Mills's building. "Rose, Lisa!" Sophie screamed, jumping out of the barely stopped car. Chase ran toward his daughters, his heart in his throat. The men reached for the twins, but Chase barreled into them, knocking one off balance while Sophie pulled the girls away. "Run!" Chase yelled, struggling with the larger man. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Emily had called them. Mills's men scattered, leaving Chase bruised but relieved as he wrapped his arms around his family. "What were you thinking?" Sophie sobbed, clutching the twins. "We just wanted to help," Lisa whispered, tears streaming down his face. "We thought if we talked to him," Rose added. Chase knelt before his daughters, his voice firm but gentle. "You are children. This is not your fight. Your only job is to be safe and let us protect you." "But we're tough," Rose protested weakly. "The toughest," Chase agreed, pulling them close. "But you're also precious to us. More precious than anything." As they drove home, Chase watched his family in the rearview mirror. Sophie holding the twins close, all three exhausted from fear. His jaw clenched with determination. Mills had crossed a line, threatening children. This had to end. Back at Chase's penthouse, the family gathered in his study. Sophie paced nervously while the twins sat close together on the leather couch, still shaken from their encounter. Chase stood by his desk, phone in hand. "Emily and the investigator are on their way," he announced. "We need a real plan." Sophie stopped pacing and faced Chase. "I might be able to help with that." Her voice was quiet but steady. "During my years in hiding, I learned things about Mills's operation. Things he wouldn't want anyone to know." Chase's eyes widened. "What kind of things?" "Names, dates, locations." Sophie sat down next to the twins. "I kept detailed notes of everything I overheard. It was my insurance policy." Emily arrived with the private investigator, Tom Bennett, who immediately pulled out his laptop. "Mrs. Carter, anything you can tell us would be invaluable." Rose and Lisa watched intently as their mother described hidden warehouses, secret meetings, and suspicious bank transfers. Their eyes grew wide with pride at their mother's cleverness. "Mom was like a spy," Rose whispered to Lisa, who nodded in agreement. Chase noticed how the twins hung on every word. Girls, you've shown incredible bravery today, but from now on, you help by staying safe. That's your mission.
But we want to help,
Lisa protested. You are helping, Emily assured them, by giving us peace of mind, knowing you're protected. As Tom typed furiously on his laptop, cross-referencing Sophie's information with his own findings, patterns began to emerge. Chase studied the data, his business mind clicking into gear. Look here, he pointed to the screen. Mills uses the same shell companies over and over. That's sloppy. Sophie leaned in. Those warehouses I mentioned? They're all registered to these companies. We can trace the money, Emily added excitedly. Follow the paper trail right to Mills. Chase felt a surge of hope as their plan took shape. With Sophie's insider knowledge, Tom's investigative skills, and Emily's business expertise, they had a real chance at exposing Mills. We'll need to move carefully, Chase cautioned. One wrong step and Mills could destroy the evidence. Or worse, Sophie added softly, squeezing the twins' shoulders. Chase watched his family, Sophie's determined expression, the twins' eager faces, Emily's focused energy, and Tom's professional confidence. For the first time since this began, he felt truly optimistic. We have something Mills doesn't, Chase said firmly. We have the truth, and we have each other. Chase sat in his office, surrounded by stacks of files and old employee records. His father's former secretary, Margaret Wilson, sat across from him, her hands trembling as she held a cup of coffee. I always knew something wasn't right, Margaret said softly. The way Mr. Mills would come in late at night, shredding documents when he thought no one was watching. Chase leaned forward. We need your help, Margaret. You and anyone else who witnessed Mills' corruption. With your testimony, we can stop him. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. There are others. James from accounting. Mills forced him out when he started asking questions. And Sarah from legal. She tried to warn your father about the illegal contracts. While Chase worked to gather allies, Emily was deep in the company archives, searching through years of financial records. Her dedication had already uncovered several suspicious transactions, but she knew they needed more. Chase! Emily burst into his office, waving a folder. Look at this. She spread documents across his desk, pointing to a series of numbers. Mills didn't just help your father hide money, he was stealing from both of you. These offshore accounts, they're all in his name. Chase studied the papers, his jaw tightening. This is it, this is what we needed. At home, Sophie helped the twins with their homework while keeping a watchful eye on the security cameras. Rose looked up from her math book. Dad's going to win, right? He's going to take down the bad guys? Sophie smiled, but her eyes were worried. Your father is very smart and very brave. He's doing everything he can. The next morning brought devastating news. Mills had moved against Chase's remaining legitimate businesses. 3 major contracts canceled overnight. 2 development projects shut down. Chase's phone wouldn't stop ringing with panicked investors and angry board members. He's trying to bankrupt us, Emily said, watching Chase pace his office. But the offshore account records, they're solid evidence. We just need a little more time. James Peterson, the former accountant Margaret had mentioned, arrived looking nervous but determined. I kept copies, he said, pulling out an old flash drive, of everything. Every illegal transaction, every threatened employee. I couldn't just let it go. More former employees began coming forward. Sarah Chen from legal brought documentation of Mills's threats. A former security guard provided surveillance footage of late-night meetings with known criminals. Chase gathered them all in a conference room, their faces a mix of fear and determination. What Mills did to all of you, what my father allowed him to do, it ends now. Together we can expose everything. But Mills wasn't finished. By afternoon, Chase's stock had plummeted. 2 more projects collapsed. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Walk away now, or lose everything. Chase showed the message to Sophie when he got home. She took his hand, squeezing it tight. We already lost everything once, she said. We survived. We'll survive this too. Rose and Lisa, listening from the doorway, ran to hug their father. We don't care about being rich. Lisa said firmly. "We just want our family." Chase held his daughters close, looking at Sophie over their heads. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that no amount of money could compare to what he had now. With Emily's evidence, the testimony of his father's former employees, and his family's support, he was ready to face whatever came next. Chase stood at the podium, his heart pounding as camera flashes lit up the hotel conference room. Dozens of reporters waited eagerly, their notepads ready. Behind him, Emily arranged the evidence folders while Sophie sat with Rose and Lisa in the front row. "Thank you all for coming," Chase began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Today, I'm here to expose years of corruption within Carter Enterprises under the leadership of my father and his associate, Gregory Mills." As Chase began presenting the evidence, displaying documents on the large screen behind him, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. Gregory Mills strode in, flanked by his lawyers. "This is nothing but lies from a desperate man," Mills called out, his voice carrying across the room. "Chase Carter is trying to destroy his father's legacy because he can't handle the pressure of running the company." The reporters turned their cameras toward Mills, who smiled confidently. "Chase Carter's own poor business decisions have led to the company's recent troubles. He's looking for someone to blame." Chase felt his carefully planned presentation slipping away as reporters began shouting questions at both men. But then, something unexpected happened. Sophie stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear and strong. "My name is Sophie Carter," she announced, walking to the podium. The room fell silent. 12 years ago, Gregory Mills threatened my life and the lives of my unborn children if I didn't disappear. Mills' smile faltered as Sophie continued. "I lived in fear, homeless with my twin girls, because this man and his associates would have killed us if we came forward. They forced me to separate my children from their father, all to protect their illegal operations." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, but her voice never wavered. "I wasn't the only one. There are dozens of us, people whose lives were destroyed to keep these secrets." The reporters were frantically taking notes now, their cameras focused on Sophie. Rose and Lisa moved to stand beside their mother, their presence making her story even more powerful. Emily stepped forward, distributing packets of evidence to the press. "We have documented proof of every accusation," she stated firmly. "Bank records, witness testimonies, surveillance footage. It's all here." Mills tried to interrupt, but his voice was drowned out by the wave of questions from reporters. His face had lost its color as he watched his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. "Mr. Mills," one reporter called out, "how do you respond to these offshore account records showing systematic theft from Carter Enterprises?" Another jumped in. "What about the documented threats against former employees?" Mills backed toward the door, his lawyers whispering urgently in his ears. The cameras followed his retreat, capturing every moment of his hasty departure. Chase wrapped his arm around Sophie's shoulders as she finished speaking. Rose and Lisa pressed close to their parents, their family united before the world. The flash of cameras captured this moment, not just of a scandal exposed, but of a family rebuilt from the ashes of corruption. The morning after the press conference, dark clouds hung over the city. Chase sat in his study, reviewing security footage when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his head of security. 3 suspicious vehicles had been spotted circling the property. "We need to be extra careful now," Chase told Sophie as they gathered the family in the secure room he'd had installed. "Mills won't go down without a fight." That night, while driving home from a late meeting, Chase's worst fears materialized. 2 black SUVs boxed in his car on a quiet stretch of road. His security detail, following in a separate vehicle, immediately sprang into action. As bullets peppered his bulletproof car, Chase's driver executed a defensive maneuver, ramming one of the SUVs aside while his security team engaged the attackers. "Get down, sir!" his driver shouted as they sped away from the scene. Chase's hands trembled as he called home to check on his family. The next afternoon, while Rose and Lisa were returning from their tutoring session with their security detail, another attack came. A van screeched to a halt in front of their car, and armed men poured out. "Get behind me," their security guard ordered. But the twins had other ideas. While the guards engaged the attackers, Rose pulled out his phone and started recording, capturing clear images of Mills's hired muscle. Meanwhile, Lisa had the presence of mind to call 911, calmly giving their location and description of the attackers. "The police are coming," Lisa shouted, her voice carrying across the street. The sound of approaching sirens sent the attackers scrambling back to their vehicle. When Chase and Sophie arrived at the scene minutes later, they found their daughters being praised by the police for their quick thinking. The footage Rose captured provided clear evidence linking the attackers to Mills. "You girls could have been killed," Sophie sobbed, holding them tight. "We couldn't just do nothing, Mom," Rose said, still shaking but proud. "We remembered what Dad said about always gathering evidence," Lisa added, looking up at Chase. That evening, as the family huddled in their secure room, Chase looked at the faces of his loved ones. Sophie's eyes were tired but determined, the twins trying to appear brave despite their ordeal, and Emily working tirelessly on her laptop to coordinate with law enforcement. "These attacks are getting worse," Chase said, his voice heavy with concern. "Mills is desperate, which makes him more dangerous. We need to end this soon." Chase sat in his parked car at the abandoned warehouse district, his heart pounding. The plan was set. Police units were hidden nearby, and Emily had ensured every detail was perfect. Gregory Mills's black Mercedes pulled up right on time. Chase stepped out of his car, keeping his movements steady despite his racing pulse. "I knew you'd eventually come crawling back to negotiate," Mills said, his smile cold and calculating. "Your father would be disappointed to see you destroying everything he built." "My father?" Chase's voice was firm. "Tell me more about how he manipulated everything." Mills circled Chase like a predator. "Your father saw how soft you were getting with that artist girl. Sophie, wasn't it? When she told him about the pregnancy, he knew you'd choose her over the empire, so we made her disappear." He chuckled darkly. "It was almost too easy." "You destroyed lives," Chase said, his fists clenching. "You separated me from my children." "Your father protected you from weakness," Mills snapped. "Just like I'm trying to do now. Drop this crusade and maybe your precious family won't have any more accidents." Chase noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Police units getting into position. He just needed to keep Mills talking. "My father was wrong about everything," Chase said. "About business, about family, about what really matters." "Don't be a fool!" Mills grabbed Chase's collar. "You're throwing away an empire for what? Some woman and 2 brats?" "No," Chase said calmly. "I'm building something better." Mills must have sensed something was wrong. He reached into his jacket, but before he could draw his weapon, police cars burst out from their hiding spots, lights flashing. Mills shoved Chase aside and tried to run, but officers tackled him to the ground after a brief struggle. As Mills was handcuffed and read his rights, he shouted, "Your father would have died of shame." Chase watched the police car drive away with Mills in the back seat. He pulled out his phone to call Sophie and the girls. It was finally over. Chase stood in his office, staring at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Papers covered his desk. Documents that would transform his father's corrupt business empire into something meaningful. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, organizing another stack of paperwork. Chase turned to her with a gentle smile, the kind that had become more frequent lately. "Every penny of that dirty money is going to help people who need it." He had already established 3 new charitable foundations, one for homeless youth, another for domestic violence survivors, and a third for families affected by corporate corruption. The irony wasn't lost on him. At home, Sophie was painting again. Her easel stood near the window of their family room, sunlight streaming across her canvas. Rose and Lisa sat nearby, attempting their own artwork while sneaking glances at their mother's skilled brushstrokes. "Mom, yours looks way better than ours," Rose complained good-naturedly. "That's because she's had more practice, dummy," Lisa teased, earning a playful shove from her sister. Sophie's laugh filled the room, a sound that was becoming wonderfully common. "Art isn't about being perfect, girls. It's about expressing what's in your heart." When Chase came home that evening with Emily, the twins exchanged knowing looks. "Dad brought Emily for dinner again," Rose whispered loudly to Lisa. Third time this week, Lisa responded with an exaggerated wink. Chase felt his cheeks flush, and Emily looked down with a shy smile. Sophie caught his eye across the room and gave him an approving nod. During dinner, Chase shared his latest plans. "We're converting the old storage facilities into affordable housing units," he explained. "And the offshore accounts? They're funding scholarship programs now." "You're really doing it," Sophie said softly. "You're changing everything." "We're doing it," Chase corrected her. "All of us together." Emily reached for his hand under the table, and the twins pretended to gag dramatically, causing everyone to burst into laughter. Later that evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Sophie worked on a new painting while the girls played chess. Chase watched them all, his heart full. The fear that had haunted Sophie's eyes for so long had finally faded, replaced by a peaceful contentment that made her even more beautiful. "Checkmate," Lisa declared triumphantly. "No way! You cheated," Rose protested. "Did not." "Did too." "Girls," Sophie called out without looking up from her canvas. "Play nice." Chase felt Emily lean against his shoulder as they watched the scene unfold. The twins caught this subtle movement and immediately began making heart shapes with their hands, causing Emily to blush and Chase to roll his eyes affectionately. This was what real success felt like, Chase realized. Not the cold numbers in a bank account or the hollow praise of business associates, but the warm laughter of family and the knowledge that they were making the world a little better, one day at a time. Chase stood at the head of his dining table, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood. The formal dining room felt different now, warmer somehow, despite its grand chandelier and expensive artwork. Sophie sat to his right while Rose and Lisa fidgeted in their chairs across from her. Emily had excused herself for the evening, understanding this moment needed to be just family. "I've been practicing what to say," Chase began, his voice thick with emotion. "But nothing seems enough." He looked at each of them in turn. "The years you spent struggling, hiding, living in fear, that should never have happened. I should have looked harder, fought harder." Sophie's eyes glistened with tears. "Chase, please," he said gently. "I need to say this." He turned to the twins. "Girls, I missed your first steps, your first words. I missed tucking you in at night and kissing your scraped knees better. I can't get those years back, but I promise you'll never know that kind of hardship again." Rose and Lisa exchanged glances, their usual mischief replaced by something deeper. "We know you didn't know about us, Dad," Lisa said quietly. "Yeah," Rose added. "Your dad was the real bad guy." The next day, Chase led his daughters into his father's old office. The room still held that imposing energy, with its dark wood panels and heavy curtains. "Time to clean house," he announced, handing each girl a box. As they sorted through decades of memories, they found photographs of Chase as a child, always standing straight-backed beside his stern-faced father. "You look so serious," Rose commented, holding up a picture. "I was trying so hard to make him proud," Chase admitted, taking the photo. "I didn't understand then that his approval came with too high a price." In another drawer, they found Chase's old baseball mitt. "You played?" Lisa asked excitedly. "Until Father decided it was a waste of time," Chase replied, then smiled. "Maybe we could play catch sometime." Both girls' faces lit up at the suggestion. At the office, Chase called a company-wide meeting. His employees filled the conference room, their expressions guarded. They'd seen too many corporate promises come and go. "I know many of you have doubts," Chase began. "You've watched this company operate in the shadows for years. That ends now." He outlined his plans for ethical reform, transparent accounting, fair labor practices, environmental responsibility. "Every decision we make going forward will consider its impact on people first, profit second." To his surprise, Sarah from accounting stood up. "Mr. Carter, I've worked here for 20 years. This is the first time I felt proud to be part of this company." Others nodded in agreement, and Chase felt something shift in the room. Hope replacing cynicism, trust beginning to grow where suspicion had ruled. That evening, as Chase finished signing the last of the reform documents, Emily brought him a coffee. "Your staff is behind you," she said. "They see who you really are now." Chase nodded, thinking of his family at home. I'm finally becoming the man they deserve. Chase stood before the gleaming new sign of the Carter Family Foundation, his heart swelling with pride. The modern building, with its welcoming glass facade, represented everything he wanted his legacy to become. Sophie stood beside him, her hand warm in his. The Sophie Carter Youth Program, she read aloud, shaking her head in disbelief. Chase, you didn't have to name it after me. Yes, I did, he said softly. You protected our girls when I couldn't. You showed them what real strength looks like. Inside, Rose and Lisa darted around the community space, arranging chairs and hanging colorful banners. They'd insisted on helping with every detail of the upcoming event. Dad, Rose called out, we need more chairs over here. Some of the kids from the shelter said they're bringing their whole families. Emily crossed the room with her tablet, checking off items on her list. The catering's confirmed, and we've got extra volunteers coming to help with the children's activities, she reported, then smiled at the twins. The girls' idea to share their story was brilliant. It's given so many families hope. The day of the event arrived, and the foundation's halls filled with voices and laughter. Children who had known nothing but hardship played games and created art, their parents watching with tears in their eyes. Chase saw his own girls moving among them, sharing snacks and stories, showing that change was possible. Sophie took the podium, her voice steady despite her emotion. A year ago, I was still hiding, still afraid, she began. My girls were sleeping in shelters and searching through dumpsters for food. She paused, meeting Chase's eyes. But one man's choice to face the truth, to right the wrongs of the past, changed everything. Not just for us, but for all of you. The crowd listened intently as she continued. This foundation isn't just about money or programs. It's about healing. It's about showing that no matter how dark things seem, there's always hope. Former victims of Gregory Mills and Chase's father approached Chase throughout the event, sharing their stories. Some had lost homes, others their businesses. But here, in this space of healing, they found something new: community. Rose and Lisa gathered a group of children their age, speaking with a confidence that made Chase's chest tighten with emotion. We know what it's like to be scared and hungry, Rose said. But look at us now, Lisa added, gesturing around the bright space. Things can get better. They did for us. Emily watched from beside Chase, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. They're naturals, she whispered. They're going to change so many lives. Chase nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. His daughters, once lost to him, were now leading others toward hope. Sophie caught his eye from across the room and smiled, her eyes shining with tears of joy. In that moment, Chase knew that while they couldn't change the past, they could create a future filled with purpose and love. A local reporter from the City Tribune sat across from Chase in the foundation's sunlit conference room, her recorder placed between them. Mr. Carter, she began, your transformation has captivated our community. How does it feel to go from being known as the Ice King of business to becoming a beacon of hope? Chase's eyes softened as he glanced through the glass walls, watching Rose and Lisa excitedly pointing at their artwork hanging in the lobby. The truth is, I didn't transform myself. My family transformed me. My daughters showed me what real courage looks like, living on the streets but never losing their kindness. And Sophie? He paused, emotion catching in his throat. She protected our girls through impossible circumstances when I wasn't there to help. The reporter leaned forward, intrigued. And now you're teaching young entrepreneurs about ethical business practices? Yes, Chase nodded. I want them to understand what I learned too late, that success means nothing if it comes at the cost of human dignity. Every Thursday, we host workshops where I share both my mistakes and the lessons I've learned. In the lobby, Rose and Lisa stood proudly before their collaborative painting, a striking piece showing two small figures walking toward a sunrise. Look, Mom! Rose pointed to the golden rays they'd painted. Emily helped us with the blending technique. Sophie wrapped her arms around her daughters while Emily beamed beside them. It's beautiful, girls, Sophie whispered. "You've captured hope perfectly." The foundation staff moved quietly around them, arranging new displays and greeting visitors. One young staff member approached Chase as he finished his interview. "Sir, your next mentoring session is about to begin. We have 15 young entrepreneurs waiting in the learning center." Chase stood, straightening his tie, no longer the expensive silk he once wore, but a modest blue one Rose and Lisa had given him for Father's Day. "Thank you," he said to the reporter. "But if you want to see real inspiration, talk to the families we serve. Their resilience is the real story here." As he walked toward the learning center, Chase overheard one of his daughter explaining their artwork to a visitor. "See? The sunrise means there's always a new day coming, no matter how dark it gets." Chase smiled, knowing that his greatest legacy wouldn't be the buildings or businesses he'd built, but the hearts he'd helped heal, starting with his own. Chase pulled up to the sprawling countryside estate, his heart racing with anticipation. The Georgian-style home sat nestled among rolling hills, its red brick exterior warm and welcoming in the afternoon sun. He glanced in the rearview mirror at his blindfolded passengers, Sophie, Rose, and Lisa, their faces filled with curiosity. "Are we there yet?" Rose asked for the 10th time, fidgeting with her blindfold. "Almost," Chase replied, sharing a knowing smile with Emily, who sat in the passenger seat. He helped them out of the car one by one, positioning them on the circular driveway. "Okay, you can look now." 3 pairs of hands lifted their blindfolds, followed by 3 gasps of amazement. The house stood proudly before them, its windows gleaming, surrounded by mature oak trees and pristine gardens. "Is this—" Sophie's voice trailed off, her eyes wide with wonder. "This is our new home," Chase announced softly. "Come on, let me show you inside." He led them through the house, watching their reactions carefully. The twins darted from room to room, their excited shouts echoing through the halls. When they reached the back of the house, Chase opened a set of French doors to reveal a professional-grade art studio, flooded with natural light. "This is yours, Sophie," he said quietly. "I remember how much you loved to paint." Sophie stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Her fingers traced the easel by the window, brand new art supplies arranged perfectly on nearby shelves. "Chase, I don't know what to say." Through the studio's windows, they could see Rose and Lisa already exploring the elaborate playground in the backyard, complete with a treehouse and climbing equipment. "You did all this for us?" Sophie asked, her voice thick with emotion. Chase nodded. "The city holds too many bad memories. I thought we could use a fresh start, somewhere peaceful." "Emily helped pick out everything!" Rose shouted, running back inside with Lisa close behind. "Right, Emily?" Emily blushed, smoothing her skirt. "I just offered some suggestions." "You should live here too," Lisa blurted out, causing both Chase and Emily to freeze. "Yeah," Rose chimed in. "You're here all the time anyway, and Dad smiles more when you're around." An awkward silence fell over the room. Chase cleared his throat, his cheeks reddening, while Emily suddenly became very interested in her shoes. Sophie couldn't help but laugh, breaking the tension. "Girls," she said, still chuckling, "why don't you go explore your new rooms upstairs?" As the twins thundered up the staircase, Sophie turned to Chase. "This is more than I ever dreamed possible," she said softly. "You really have changed." Chase looked around at his family, at Sophie's grateful smile, at Emily's gentle presence, at the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through their new home. "I finally understand what matters most," he replied. In the bright morning light of her new studio, Sophie stood before a large canvas, paintbrush moving with confident strokes. The scene taking shape depicted 2 small girls huddled together in the rain, a memory from darker days transformed into something powerful through her art. Rose and Lisa burst into the studio, their energy filling the space. "Mom, these are amazing!" Rose exclaimed, studying the growing collection of paintings that lined the walls. "Can we really hang them at the foundation?" Lisa asked, his eyes wide with pride. Sophie nodded, dabbing more paint onto her brush. "Your father thinks it might help other families see there's hope, even in the darkest times." Later that afternoon, The sprawling backyard of their countryside home buzzed with activity. Foundation staff and families gathered for a community picnic, sharing stories and breaking bread together. Children played on the playground while adults mingled on checkered blankets spread across the lawn. Chase moved through the crowd, stopping to chat with each family. These were people who had suffered under his father's corrupt dealings, but today they shared meals and laughter, the past's sharp edges slowly softening into healing. Emily approached him with 2 glasses of lemonade, offering one with a warm smile. They walked together to a quiet spot beneath an oak tree, away from the crowd. "Look at all of this," Emily said softly, gesturing to the scene before them. "You've created something beautiful from something broken." Chase turned to her, his expression tender. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emily. You helped me see what was possible." Their eyes met, and Chase gently took her hand. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken understanding. Slowly, naturally, they drew closer until their shoulders touched, sharing a quiet intimacy that needed no words. On the porch, Sophie watched her daughters playing tag with the other children, their joyful shouts carrying across the yard. Chase joined her, leaning against the railing. "I never thought we'd have this," Sophie admitted, watching Rose help a younger child up after a fall. "Neither did I," Chase replied, his voice full of gratitude. "But looking at them now..." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the fading afternoon light, their laughter echoing across the peaceful countryside. The shadows of their past had finally given way to something brighter, something whole. The grand ballroom of the Carter Foundation sparkled with elegant decorations as hundreds of community members gathered for the annual gala. Chase and Sophie stood near the stage, watching their daughter adjust their ties before their speech. "They've grown so much," Sophie whispered, squeezing Chase's hand. Her eyes glistened with pride as Rose and Lisa stepped up to the microphone. "A year ago," Rose began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "Lisa and I were digging through dumpsters just to survive." Lisa picked up where her sister left off. "We didn't have a home or hope or even a real family. But then we found our dad, or maybe he found us." The twins took turns sharing their story, their words touching every heart in the room. They spoke of cold nights and empty stomachs, but also of redemption and second chances. "Our mom protected us all those years," Rose said, looking at Sophie with tears in his eyes. "And now, through the foundation, we get to help protect other families too." Emily dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she watched from the side of the stage. The girls she'd first met, scared and defensive, had blossomed into confident young speakers. "None of this would have been possible," Lisa continued, her voice thick with emotion, "without the love and support of our parents, Miss Emily, and everyone at the foundation who believed in us." The audience rose in a standing ovation, many wiping away tears. Chase wrapped his arm around Sophie's shoulders as they watched their daughters bow and wave. The evening transitioned into a series of touching moments. Chase in his office, surrounded by young entrepreneurs eager to learn about ethical business practices. His face was animated as he shared lessons about combining success with compassion. In her sun-filled studio, Sophie stood before an easel, teaching art classes to children from the foundation. Her paintings, telling stories of hope and survival, lined the walls. Emily moved efficiently through the foundation's offices, coordinating outreach programs and family support services. Her desk displayed a photo of the entire Carter family at their countryside home. On the foundation's playground, Rose and Lisa played basketball with other children, their laughter infectious as they taught younger kids how to dribble and shoot. Later that evening, Chase drove his silver car through the familiar city streets. But unlike the lonely figure he'd once been, he now had Sophie beside him and the twins in the back seat, all singing along to the radio. The city lights reflected off their smiling faces as they headed home together, a family whole and complete at last. If you enjoyed the story of Chase, Rose, and Lisa, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.